Introduction to Cosmology, a memoir by Peter Neuendorffer, copyright 2010 by Peter Neuendorffer. I was very excited about my new course as a freshman on the Meaning of the Universe, Introduction to Cosmology. We were standing on the busy steps outside a landing door entitled Do Not Enter. My professor, Mr. Biasi, was a thin man, not bad looking, in his early 20s, with orange blonde hair and a button nose. Mr. Biasi had an evil grin, almost like Santa Claus sideways. He had just told me that I was not going to be continuing in his Introduction to Cosmology course, which I had been so enthusiastic about. I had been like the student answering questions with a frantic wave. Me, call on me, Mr. Biasi. I realized I was taking up a lot of his time. After all, this was an Ivy League school. As students streamed by on the stairway, I knew now that I was doomed. No professor, no course title, not even a phone number from my professor. So what was the meaning of life, I wondered. When I took a remedial course in the history of science at Harvard Summer School, we read a book originally recommended by my first psychiatrist, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by T.S. Kuhn. The author's idea was that all changes in scientific theory came about as a result of radical changes in observations, so they did not match up with existing theory. Not 4 years later, I made a suicide attempt, putting my head in the oven without the pilot light being lit. I rationalized that this would have been a real attempt because my roommate was coming home from work, but what if he didn't come in? I soon landed up at a famous private mental hospital. It was recommended by my psychiatrist, who told me a very famous musician had been there. The place was on a hill near Happyville Square in Happyville. At one point, we had 3 musical bands at the hospital, and I did the arrangements for one entitled Bobsy and the Happyville Squares, for flute, cello, voice, violin, piano, and not-so-great drums. If you want to know what the hospital was like, you need not look any farther than the Terry Gilliam film 12 Monkeys, starring Brad Pitt as the overzealous patient. By making a big scene, he enabled the main character's escape. 10 years after that, after numerous stays at state mental and health clinics, one admitting doctor told me I wouldn't be getting any Valium. I didn't know what Valium was at the time. Another admitting doctor asked, "Do you know what is stamped on the front page of your record from the private hospital?" The record was 6 inches thick. "No," I replied. "It says chronic alcoholic." I was mortified. So, after the state hospital, I was waiting in line outside in the freezing rain to get a bed at the Pine Street shelter in Boston's Chinatown. Supper was chunks of hot dogs and pea soup. There were very, very crazy people there. One drunk pointed at me and said to his friend, "He doesn't even drink." Back in the 70s, I'd lived in various rooming houses. I moved so frequently that it was difficult for me to get my Social Security disability checks. They were always being sent to a previous address. I would eat in cafeterias that I couldn't afford and ended up being booted out of my room, so they would lock my door so I couldn't get in. The ladies in the front desk were friendly, but one man was a real grouch, and when the house burned to the ground, he said, "You can't come back." I had recurring nightmares about that and about being thrown out of Harvard. One day I was walking up Beacon Hill, and a man came up to me in a regulation Jack Klugman faded raincoat and said, "Hello, Peter, how you doing?" Well, I didn't know this guy from a hole in the wall, but he knew me from the meetings. I said, well, my rooming house burned down. I have cancer. I think the government is out to get me. Otherwise, everything's fine. And the man says, oh, well, I've had enough trouble with the booze. I'm going to a meeting. Do you want to come along? I said, sure. And so that was my first recovery meeting. One day I was going up Palmer Street in Harvard Square. An old friend of mine called up to me. Peter, he said, you've got to see this. You pay $5 and you can get up on stage and sing two songs. You pay $5 and you can get up on stage and sing two songs. I was hooked on the open mics from that day on. Occasionally I got to do a half-hour feature at one. I neglected to say that I play the piano. I studied at the New England Conservatory of Music, and in my 20s I played many times on WBUR-FM radio. My friend John and I demonstrated the artificial intelligence conversation software I wrote at a storefront open mic in Natick. We had a microphone hooked up to a computer, which was hooked up to a speaker. Unfortunately, the program was so enamored with itself that I couldn't get a word in edgewise. I remember my friend saying after a particularly long introduction to a song involving pages of information about the labor unions, just play the F song. The same funny guy had a great German Shepherd collie that loved to play fetch. My friend who was talking to me. You would throw a ball and the collie would bring it back. Then you would say, give me the ball, and he would play tug of war with you and the ball. But as soon as you said drop it, he would dutifully deposit the ball at your feet, all ready to be thrown once again. Unfortunately, dogs were eventually banned from the performance space. The space moved into the refurbished Natick firehouse, but everyone agreed that the golden age of the Natick open mic was over. After a couple of years, it spun off into a concert space in the neighboring town of Framingham at the firehouse there. No longer a computer programmer, I use GoDaddy to design my website. Google is to do my internet searching, Netflix, and my digital video recorder to watch movies. I have made music CDs. I call the open mics recovery without alcohol. Last Sunday I played piano during church, which was broadcast on FM and the internet. Although there weren't many people at church, it was just after Christmas and there was a big snowstorm brewing. My playing went over big. This Thursday I'm playing a half-hour set at Amazing Things Art Center. Actually, this is when this was written, not now, in Framingham, but not to sound too much like an advertisement, I should return to my story. I used to collect pianos, asking to play them, from the bandstand at Niagara Falls to a piano in Exeter, Take Two. I used to collect pianos, asking to play them, from the bandstand at Niagara Falls to a piano in Exeter, Mass, to an upright piano in Rockport, and pianos in San Francisco, including one at a smooth bar called the Candy Store, where slinky, skinny women played pool as I played piano, with a portly matron at my side giving me encouragement. I spent a summer at the Arundel Opera Theater in Maine, an old-style summer stock theater where we put on a new show every week. Sometimes I would be playing piano in the pit, and sometimes I would be an extra on stage. I got so tired that when I was playing rehearsals, I used to see people in the wooden floor and notes on the wooden floor. When I was growing up, we had a Cocker Spaniel named Misty who was very high-strung. She was black with tan eyebrows and paws. She would have been the pride of the litter, except she had buck teeth. She learned how to shake hands, roll over, sit, and lie down in that order. So any time she wanted a table scrap, she would go into her routine. Misty was deathly afraid of thunder and lightning, as were my mother and I. During a thunderstorm, she, Misty, would hide under the bed. But towards the end of her life, she became deaf and couldn't hear the thunder. Eventually, she also went blind, and it was decided to put her down. We lived in a sedate, split-level development in a house built just for us. Out back were pine tree woods. We built a deck with a tree through the middle. Squirrels would dart up and down the tree, much to the chagrin of Misty, who could never catch them. As if adding injury to insult, they would drop chestnuts down on her head.